everyone. This is our ANS class on rectangular construction of garments. And I am Lady Guðrún Sveinsdóttir, and we are going to get started. All right. So if anybody wants to come a little closer, or I can just share my screen. I think that's probably the easiest way to do this. Share screen. Hello. Hello, come on in. Hey. All right, so I've got some patterns that we're gonna talk about today. How much garb making or construction of clothing has everybody done? I know you've done a lot. You've done a lot, a little. Okay. And you've done a lot of construction of clothing. Molly, have you done un poquito, little tiny bit? All right. And Augusta Rose, you've done some. I'm just listening. Okay. Excellent. All right. So there are a lot of different patterns available, of course, and there are a lot of eras that have a wide variety. So what I have done is I'm breaking this series up into different periods and different types of clothing construction. So this is mostly early period clothing because a lot of that has to do with the rectangular construction. There are several theories around this. One of the theories is because the looms could only go so wide, and therefore you wanted to make sure you didn't have a whole bunch of loom waste, especially because weaving is very labor intensive and there are so many steps to getting the fiber to a finished product. So you wanted to save time and materials wherever you could. So that is definitely one plausible theory that has come about. The earliest ones that we know about, of course, are going to be Greek and Roman and Egyptian and other examples of pretty much you take a wide rectangle of fabric, you fold it over, you might sew the edge, you pin it at the shoulders, you belt it, you're good to go. And the length of the garment will depend on sometimes gender, sometimes climate. So I've got some examples here. If I can get them out of here, I kind of stuffed them in. So this would be just a rectangle of fabric. I folded it in half, put it around, I pin it at my shoulders, I put a belt on, and I'm good to go.
Look at that.
And that's a drape. Yeah. So that's one of the easiest things you can do. A lot of people use this in the summer, especially because a lot of just very gauzy linens and other lightweight fabrics breathe very easily, and therefore this is one of the lightest things you can wear if you are at a summer event and don't want to be too warm. So there's one. I just realized I'm not really in camera for showing these things off, so I think that works better. The next variation on this is getting a little more fancy, where you use more buttons to either more fibulae or more buttons to make drapier sleeves, and so you have a longer stitch out. Thank you. So it is still a big rectangle, but then the sleeve edges have those buttons or fibulae. You still belt it. Now, of course, this is more of a chiton, which is the Greek word. And if you wanted to make a peplos, the peplos is the one that's folded over. And let me show you with the green how that works. I know I'm kind of rushing through this part of it because I want to make sure we get to the actual fabric cutting out. So say I wanted to make this into a peplos. I would fold this over, fold the top edge over, and now I've got something that could be, once it's here, it could have an edge that came up and covered my hair, or I can use it just as a slightly extra drape, or, you know, it's just a bit of extra modesty because it's another layer of very loose fabric, the under part belted over. So those are options. Let's see, the next ones we're going to get into are the more Viking era.
Oh, can I add?
Yes.
So
please.
a lot, because the word peplos is Greek, and you know, chiton is Greek for that matter, people assume that those were, some people think those were only born in the classical world, but they seem to be widespread throughout all of Northern Europe, all the way from 2000 BC to 1000 AD. So if you're thinking of being in England in 600 AD, you're probably wearing that.
Yeah, you just, in colder climates, you're going to wear a longer sleeve, something underneath in colder weather, and then having, it's also a precursor to a Viking era apron dress, smoker, hanger, whatever you want to call it. So they're, so they have Finnish. Actually, may I show the picture of the book?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Thank you.
The Finns were the longest holding on to that style of the simple tube folded over at the top.
Yeah.
The Finns held on to it till about 1000 AD. And the reason we know about it is that it's held on by two shoulder clasps. And although the fabric deteriorates in the graves, the clasps will sometimes preserve the layers. You see two layers of identical cloth under the brooch, chances are it's a double folded top.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, getting carried away here.
No, thank you for bringing that example too, because that's perfect. So that is going to be the classical world, the early Northern European world. A lot of different areas have this. So then we start to get into something that's a little bit more complicated, and let me go to this here, going down to suggested styles for a Birker tunic, which I will show you an example of that. So you can do this as a short tunic, or you can do this as a long dress. It really just depends how long you cut it. So we are going to be cutting one out later today as well. But this is going to be the long piece in the middle, and then that is going to get a neck hole cut out of it. Then there are tapering sleeves, and when you cut out the sleeves, the other part, it goes to be a triangle, possibly if it's a shorter tunic, or if it's a longer dress, you can just make the triangles separately. And then there are the gussets, which are basically extra room in the armpit. so that you are able to lift your arms more easily. And these, you have different variations for the neckline. So there's the one that's described in that picture, which it's got a little bit of a facing or a, what's the word I'm looking for? Embroidery or embellishment, that's the word. Around the edge, and then there's a slit in the middle. There could also be a V-neck. There could just be a wider neckline without any slits in it. And there is something in Viking culture that, or Scandinavian culture, where theoretically, if a man wore a tunic with this slit too low, that was considered feminine and not good, which, you know, from our modern view, that's fairly annoying. But in that time period, that was the view, and she could divorce him for that. So, yeah, if you are worried about being more period accurate in your clothing choices, I would suggest making sure you check on details like that when you're making your outfit. So the nice thing about this is because it is a rectangle base, you can decide how much width you want to give it with the triangle gores. So this one I chose to do just the ones on the sides. You can theoretically split it down the front of the skirt and the back of the skirt to give it more width, but you don't have to. And it's more economical from a fabric perspective to minimize how much you need. Just make sure that you're able to walk. Different bodies need different. So, and for the arms, mine are actually a little bit too wide. So I wanted to make sure that I was able to get my arm through, but I forgot that it was going to actually turn out wider once I hemmed it. So one thing that you could do is have it just wide enough for your hem to get through, which would have been like this for me, or you can use little hooks to or clasps to close it at the wrist to make it tighter. Another thing is there was another style where the sleeves would be a lot longer, and so they ended up getting bunched up on the forearms, and they actually have found graves where you can see the wrinkles in the fabric on the forearms because of that. So that is a way to add warmth. That's also conspicuous consumption because you're using more fabric than you need to. And it could be, therefore, a sign of wealth. So these are all things to think about with your particular persona. It's also different eras and different communities are going to ask for or look for different aesthetic choices. Any questions so far on the Birker Tunic?
Do you want to explain a little about how the square underarm gusset adds spring? Because a lot of people think, why cut it separately? Why not just include it in the cutout? And they're totally missing the point of the sketch.
That is definitely a good thing to bring up. So when you're cutting this out, if you notice these gussets, when they are in the fabric, actually, let me just show you with another Birker tunic. The body of the tunic and the sleeve are both cut with the grain and then the gusset is on the bias, so it does give it more stretch, which is hugely beneficial for being able to have those extra inches.
It's a way to avoid having the seam directly under your arm. The stress of that seam is carried out to the edges of the square. So what you have is a straight piece of cloth on the bias, so it springs, but it's not a weak point for blowing out your armpits the way you might on your favorite t-shirt when it's too small.
Exactly. And this tunic actually gives another example of another neckline, which is, this is just 2 pieces rather than 1, because that was whoever made the tunic to begin with. They must have had 2 shorter rectangles, and so they sew them at the shoulders, and that's how they cut out this piece for the neckline. Was just, they didn't sew that part. I actually added the slit myself because it was hard to pull on over my head. I think it was for a smaller person. And then I actually added the godets. I didn't have anything to match the original, so I decided to have a contrasting color, which is possible. It's not done as much in period, but can if that's what you have. Which, you know, one of the things I was telling somebody yesterday was that if that when we have finds, the archaeological finds, the ones that are left are usually the fancier ones, because that's what people wanted to keep and store and bury their dead in, because, you know, they wanted to honor them. So it's going to be the fancier things. Whereas there are some, you know, there are a few finds that are kind of fragmentary, that were wadded up and in ships' hulls with the tar or pitch to block any water from getting. So they were preserved that way, and those are pretty much rags at this point. By the point they become part of the ship's hull, they were worn all to act. So, so we do have a few things like that, but for the most part, what we're going to see is the ones that were preserved for a reason. So that kind of sometimes gives us a skewed idea of what people were making their skill up. So that is the Birker Tunic. It's the most commonly used one in the SCA for Viking era because it's easy to make, it's very economical for fabric usage, and it's just the most people who've been around in the SCA for a while know how to make it, and so of course the newer members will learn from the people who've done it. So it's just, this is the widest use of this type of construction, the SCA. Let me see. Oh yeah, you can also use this for a coat pattern. All you need to do is to have it front opening. So you want to either make it straight down, just cut it down the middle, which is one possibility, or you can use the projected bends style, which is kind of an overlapping triangle in the front. So it's slightly trapezoidish, so it's going to start looking like the top of this, but then the length goes at a more diagonal so that it's a fold over. And because of the fold over, that is going to give more more ease of movement once it's belted. But other than that, this is pretty much the exact same pattern as both that tunic and the dress that I just showed. So very versatile. Okay. I think that was it for the Birker Tunic. Did everybody get my handout online, the links to that? So I linked a whole bunch of websites, which means that it's going to be much easier to actually read it online, which is why I didn't make a whole bunch of printouts. So you'll be able to see what I'm talking about that way. Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about the, actually, Marika, do you want to talk a little bit about the Eurodress pattern?
Oh, yeah.
If you're
Okay,
willing.
Sure.
Oh, thank you.
So, it's misunderstood. So, you don't have a picture of it, do you?
I will look and see. I think I have it. Yeah, I do. If I can make this.
Yeah, this will be a test of your links.
Yeah, exactly.
So, the pattern that Rosie was showing you, rectangular body, rectangular sleeves, adding sort of wedge-shaped additions on the side. That's one way to do it, and we know that is accurate because they have pulled out of the ground these whole garments with bog bodies, for example. But one of the glaciers melted away. One of the tunics made this one. Cool. But people are saying, is there really only one cut? Is everybody all over Europe only this one? How else could it be done? So this is a speculative pattern, and it has one basis in reality. This is off of the Finnish gravestone, late 1980, and the woman was buried with a lot of metallic jewelry that preserved the cloth under the jewelry. In a lot of these graves, the conditions of moisture cause all the fabric to just rot away. But if there's metal on top of it, a chemical reaction happens on the metal, it kind of rusts, but that's not it's not all iron jewelry. But the metallic will oxidize and capture either the cloth or the cloth on it. So here's this woman buried. We know what her bracelets were. We know what the center of her chest was. She had a lot of jewelry in the center of her chest. Nothing below the waist. So in all of these reconstructions, we don't, unless there's metal to preserve it, or unless you can pull a whole garment out of the ground, you don't know how long it. We're assuming it had ankle dresses. Who knows? But anyway, so here is a speculative different cut for the undergown. What they do know from under the bracelets is that that fabric was the starting border for a woven piece of cloth. These cloths were woven on a, they know this one was woven on a warp weighted loom. And that has a special starting border at the top of the cloth. It's kind of technical. I won't explain the details of it, but it's really cool. It's very cool and it's very distinctive. So they know from finding the sleeves that that sleeve edge was the starting border of the cloth as it was woven. So the way this pattern is set up, this is the sleeve up here. This is the narrow part of the sleeve, and it's set up to be on the starting border. So it's possible. It's kind of a neat thing. So here, these are the sleeves up here. This is the main body, front and back. You can see where those panels correspond. And then these narrow things in here are the gussets that widen. But in the garment that Rosie was showing you, the widening started under the arm. In this reconstruction, the widening actually goes all the way to the wrist. And it's a long piece of cloth that goes under the wrist, kind of curves. And if you stand with your arm up, it goes all the way down to the ground. Now, the practical problem, I've tried to make a few of these, and I'm telling you, they're a bugger mathematically, because with the rectangular stuff that Rosie's talking about, everything's rectangular. You figure out how wide your chest needs to be, figure out how wide your sleeves need to be, add a little extra for the sides, and you're all set. This, you're limited because this bar here is this bar here. It's going to sit right here around your chest. If you say, oh, I've got a big chest, I got to make it wide, you're going to have a really narrow side piece. And it's going to look weird and hardly, it's going to be a whole lot of sewing. Oh, remember, you're doing all this by hand. Whole lot of sewing for no practical gain. So you and then, like, suppose you have a really skinny chest, you're really slender, you're going to have a problem because the top of your sleeve is going to be slender. And you're not going to be able, maybe you're thin enough to get your arms in. You're going to have little stick arms, pieces of cloth there. So, although this looks really good on paper, if you're going to try one of these, get a muslin sheet and play with it a lot first. Because the measurements are nuts.
Yes, thank you, because you've tried one of these before. I haven't, so I appreciate you doing that part.
Albreda has done one.
Oh, really?
Albreda figured it out.
I'll have to check with her on that. Cool. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is the apron dress, and actually let me pull that up here. Here we go. So one of the great things with this is she puts down a whole bunch of different types of the pattern. So that is one conjectured pattern. Again, like the apron dresses as well, they've got, for the costume dress, they've got about this much fabric. So they've got a side seam and they've got a little bit of pleating in the front, and that's about it. So the rest of the dress pattern is completely conjecture based on what they think would make sense based on the other clothing finds, etc. So that is one option. Another would be just 2 trapezoids. And then the third, which I find to be A, a lot easier, and B, it's fabric saving as well, is going to be, you've got a front panel, you've got a back panel, and then you've got side gores, which you cut at an angle so that you can have 2 on each side. And if you see this one right here, the middle one in the pink with the little blue lines, the blue lines are the pleating like they have on the costume dress. Not all of them had that. The Hedeby finds did not have pleating, but pleating is a good way to either take in an apron dress that might have been too big for you, or if somebody's pregnant, it's a good way to add some extra down below without adding it up here. So there are definitely practical considerations for using some of these different patterns. So one thing you see in these patterns is some of them it shows front and back being equal, and some of them it says the front is a lot wider, the back's a lot smaller. Usually that's because of the pleating, but it also depends on you, your shape and size, whatever is going to work best for you. So this is an apron dress that Marika actually helped me with, and so it is using pretty much a similar construction to the one that was slightly above. Where'd it go? Sort of like this, but instead of having the front panels and the back panels be that angled at the skirt, instead you just have straight panels and then add some triangular gores down when the skirt starts around the hip or waist, wherever you want to put those, which I liked that was kind of in the middle for making sure it's not too wide up at the top, but then it gets wider at the bottom without too much fabric waste. So this wants to come down. One thing with the apron dress is these straps. And so the straps, a lot of people who make them make it as a single strap, and then they just kind of pin on the brooches onto that single strap. However, from the finds, and let me show on camera as well, it makes sense for there to be two straps. So, and they found little loops of the straps, so that you've got that little one in the front, and then you've got a long one in the back that you can adjust. So if it stretches, which it probably will do, and note, for the straps, you don't want to cut them on the bias because they will stretch more if they are on the bias. So you want to cut them on the straight grain. I don't know if I have explained straight grain versus bias yet. Has anybody heard those terms before? I know some people have heard those terms before. So basically, straight grain, the weft and warp of the fabric, how the fibers are, you want it to be straight, parallel to those fibers. Bias, you're putting it at a diagonal, which gives it more leeway to stretch. So these, you don't want that stretch. Most of them, even if they were wool, they have found linen straps on wool apron dresses. And they think that is because wool is more likely to stretch than linen. Linen is easier to just, and it was plain undyed linen. So it didn't even match the apron dress. So, it was something where it's something that's easy to replace if need be. And it's going to last longer and be less of an issue than wool. So then when you have these loops, you can adjust them as needed. So even if you have them and they do stretch, you can just re-sew it to be a little shorter, which I actually need to do because I've had these for a while, and with all the bling I have front, it does still stretch even when it is on the straight grain. Okay, so that's the apron dress. Any questions on that? Not yet. Okay, let's see, was there anything else I wanted to tell you about apron dresses? Not really, honestly. I would just read this whole page. Elfrin Ketta, A Wandering Elf, her blog is amazing and very well researched. Just, yeah, highly recommend, highly recommend. All right, so let me go back to the next thing. Unfortunately, for the Poofy Pants, I do not have an example in person because I haven't made them yet. They are on the list. I have the fabric, I just haven't gotten around to it. So let me, this is one conjectural. You have some at home? Awesome. Ordered. Oh, cool. Just hasn't gotten where the. Oh no! Of course not, because COVID. Great. Yeah. Perfect.
It's
and they're
a
really
one-size
comfy,
fit
right?
all, and they're huge.
Sweet. Yeah. So, yeah, that is one of the things. Is they are huge. If you look at the tapestries and the icons and whatever else. Figural documentation.
Some of the
rune stones, yeah, have the
prints on them.
voluminous.
Yeah.
So for finds, they have found bits. I don't believe they've found any complete. It's so hard to find anything, especially from that time period. But these are basically big poofs around to about the knee length, and then it seems to be tapered. Either there are a couple different options, and either it's going to be a long tube like that, or it just ends pretty much right under the knee with a cuff, and then you wrap the winingus around the leg wraps, and
from the evidence, you can't tell what it is.
right,
So it's
exactly,
up to the reconstructor to make something that is comfortable. Sense.
exactly. So yeah, and a lot of these have a gusset in the middle, so that gives you know, it gives a crotch area that is going to be as wide as you want it to be, and therefore going to be more comfortable and tailored to you. There are some where the back gusset is wider than the front gusset, so it's kind of a trapezoid again. And there are some that are just straight from front to back. One of the things the person here says is any excess material can be used for leg wraps, clasp sashes, etc. I would say with the leg wraps, one thing you might want to note is that what one plausible theory is that the leg wraps were woven as is, and so the edges didn't need to be finished, and therefore they would stay up on the legs better. Whereas if you use just cut fabric and then hem it, it's going to be bulkier, and it might slide down the leg more. So you use what you have, but those are warnings for you.
People who've done the winingas say that a twill weave is much better because it's springier and it will mold to your pattern
Yes.
better. And a lot of the fabric that someone might use for that would a tabby anyway. So
Exactly. So yes, twill weave much more likely to be helpful than tabby for winingas. But yeah, for fibers that we have found twills, we have found tabbies. There are various other things that I'm not going to get into right now, but if you really want to get into the weave, again, Alfreda's blog has a complete entry about all of the different weaves they have found, and it's very comprehensive. So,
I was going to say something about
yes.
that. That I have seen.
Yeah.
There were examples of herringbone, which is something that you sort of think of modern Scottish style weaving.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you think about trade routes and also going a Viking, you know, going pillaging to Scotland, etc. Yeah, that things traveled, patterns traveled, fabrics and loom styles and all of these kinds of things travel much more than we might think they did. So if you go and research those trade routes, it's amazing to see. I mean, they have found in a woman's grave in Birker, they have found a ring that has I believe it's enamel stone in it that has Arabic written on it, because it came from the trade routes probably from Baghdad or somewhere in the Abbasid Empire. So things traveled all over the place. So for these pants though, the main thing is you're going to have them as a drawstring at the top, and then they've got a whole bunch of either pleating or just gathering at the knee, just under the knee. One of the things is you're going to want it above where the calf muscle starts, because that will keep it in place. If it's under, it'll just slide down. So you want it tight enough there to keep it up, so it stays blousy, and so it doesn't try to cut into the calf muscle. Yes.
Once we have a whole bunch, they were ordered and they're ready to benefit anybody. They actually put ties there.
Oh, perfect. Yes, ties there is a great way to make sure it stays. And they may have put ties there, or they may have had just a little extra leather strap that they used as, you know, a garter, basically. So yeah. So we know for pants there were also straight trousers, and I don't know if you've seen the Thorsberg or some of the Hedeby finds. Those were actually earlier, but those are examples of more straight-legged. They're kind of more hose style. So some of them have the feet included, some of them don't, but they're more fitted. And then there's just like a straight trouser, which is another option. But hello, please do sign in and thank you. On in. So those are the Bruce pants. Bruce being the more Eastern Swedish and Eastern Viking era group. They give their name to Russia, Russia. All right. Let me see. Oh yes, and then I found a couple of links. I don't know if anybody knows the Internet Wayback Machine. It's archive.org. If you can't find a link or a link is broken in anything, go there, plug in the link, and then it'll give you a timeline of when it pinged that site. And sometimes if you go back far enough, you can still find a version, whatever the latest version of that was before it went offline. I highly recommend this for any research that you do. So there are a couple links that I put up there in the handout. Yes, I think that was it that I said about that. The next thing we're going to go is to the Middle East. Let me go to the Bishop Timotheos. Oh, no, those are the pants. Oh, no, I guess that's both the tunica and the pants. We'll go to that. So this, actually, it's somewhere in my house, but I have a modern Egyptian men's galabea, men's robe, that is pretty much this pattern. So it has stuck around. It is one of those patterns that has stood the test of time. This Abbasid dress is made off of that pattern. So the difference between this and the Birker pattern is instead of having the sleeve gusset right at the edge of the two rectangles, the rectangle for the body and the rectangle for the top of the arm, you have the gores actually start at the sleeve and then have the gusset a little bit further down the sleeve. So after making a Birker tunic and then trying to make this dress, it was very confusing for me because I was so used to the other way of doing it. But then once I got it, I was like, oh, that's actually pretty darn easy when you put it all together, because you can put this entire piece, the sleeve and the gusset and the gore together, and then you put it together with the long rectangle, and it's one long seam through the whole thing, which is great until you sew one side inside out and have to seam rip the entire thing, which I did on the very light, delicate underdress. It was like 5 hours of seam ripping the night before I had to wear this to dance. So that was fun. But yeah, so once you get the pattern, just don't sew it inside out, you'll be good. But this has a slight little bit of a slit down in the front, just a little bit. It doesn't have to be very long, just enough to be comfortable. So that is the difference there. Some of them do have a different material below where the so this is in place of a tiraz band, which would have been usually something that would have prayers written on it in Arabic, but I had a different version trim, so that's why I put that on instead. But usually tiraz bands were used around the upper arm. And yeah, sometimes it was a different fabric for the sleeves below that. It depends on what era and area, as with most of these patterns. But this is, again, another pattern that is fairly simple once you work out the measurements, and yeah, it's all squares and trapezoids and rectangles. But again, that that little gusset the armpit is still on the bias. As for the pants, those are two rectangles for the legs, and then it can be either one diamond, or it can be two triangles that you sew together for the crotch gusset. And again, that's just going to be an easy way to make some pants to go on under a longer robe. Both men and women wore them long around this time period. And so the pants were for anybody as well. This is also kind of similar to some styles of more northern brays, which are basically drawers, boxer kind of underwear, longer. So that is useful for anybody. That,
Rosie,
yes,
drawstring for the waist.
drawstring for the
And
waist.
does that pattern, I see some dotted lines, does that include the length of the whole robe for the
Yes.
drawstring? Okay.
However, you know, this was the measurements that you see here were for one specific person. So obviously you're going to want to make it for your for your fit. Yes.
Yeah.
Let me see if there's anything else to write
I
on this.
suppose the crotch gusset also would have to be made fit.
Yes, exactly. So, and there are different layouts. Let me see if this was it this one that had the different layout for the pants. Oh, this had a different layout, fabric layout for the tunic, depending on if you had 45-inch fabric versus I think the other one was 58-inch. And oh, I guess I don't have it down here, but somewhere there was another layout for the pants, which was basically the diamond is in the middle, and then it's wider on the sides, and because the pants are cut at an angle going inwards, it was more of a salwar kind of layout. And so then you just turn the pattern around for the gusset, the crotch gusset, and that's how you go together in a more comfortable way. But I can't show you, unfortunately, with this because I forgot to put that link in, but I'll try to include that link later. I think maybe the reason I did is because it's slightly less of rectangular construction. So this is going to be a similar one, a Byzantine shirt from Turkish. So this is a great site for this particular find. However, warning, on one of the other pages linked here, it does show the original find, which has the body in it. So if you're not up for that, don't click on that link. But this is another layout where it's similar to kind of in between the layout of the Bishop Timotheos and the Eurodress when you look at how they put in the gusset here. So the gusset is connected to that wider triangle, but it doesn't go all the way to the wrist. It just goes about halfway down where diamond gusset usually would. Okay. So that is a more Byzantine. I don't remember exactly what year. Yeah, I'm sure on this page it shows the year. And then, yeah, if you leave off that collar and the square, the rectangle that's in the middle here, then it is then it is more like the abbot's layout or the Bishop Timotheos layout. But that extra placket is also something that they have found in some of the Viking era stuff too, which is very cool. And then a Mamluk coat is the last one I want to show you, if I can make it work with this. Here we go. So this circa 1280, and this actually kind of is similar to a mashup of the Bishop Timotheos tunica and what I was saying about the men's Viking men's coats, kaftans that have that fold over. So this has that fold over as well. So you can see what that would look like for the Viking era as well. But again, the pattern here has that extra trapezoid and then the gusset after that. So that is going to be pretty much, oh, and here's a mock-up of the finished one. So you can see how it sits, which is pretty nifty. All right, so I'm going to stop the share. And, oh, that's weird to be up in front like that. Whatever, I can check it. So that's all of the patterns that I had prepared. Anybody have any questions yet? Let's see if I can take this off. What did you miss? Oh my gosh, watch the recording. Or I'll tell you later. Yes, Annie.
I do have one question. You did dye some fabric. Is it better to dye tab or it's already?
You can do either way, and that is also period as well to do either way. There are a lot of finds that the fiber was dyed before it became fabric, and then there were some finds that were fabric already when they were dyed, and then there were some that they think it was a piece that was over dyed with something else later on, and that could have been after it was finished product as well. So any of the above works. I will say if you dye it at the fiber level, that is going to give the most coverage, most theoretically the most even coverage. However, you can get fairly even coverage with a finished product as well, or with fabric as well. You just have to be careful of how you move it around in the dye bath. I'm happy to set up a dye class at some point if you would like. But yeah, you can do any of the above. Okay. Any other questions? Not so much. All right. So tell you what, I'm going to commandeer those two tables for fabric. Let me get out. Oh, I didn't. Wait a minute. There's one more thing I didn't show you, which is the Skildaham hood. That's also rectangular construction.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. So basically, it is going to be either one long rectangle or two rectangles that are then sewn at the top, and then the two edges are diamonds or squares that are going to be cut, attached at where the neck and the hood meet. So, got one in the front, or one in the back, one in the front. The front edge, you can also make the opening lower or higher if you need to, depending on how big your fabric is and how big you are.
Just put that.
I will put
Yeah,
that on
put
to
it on.
show
Magical about this. It never makes sense until it's
until you
worn.
see it. Yeah.
It's so hard when you're looking at it flat to understand how it works.
Yes. So now you can see, so this is the front edge, where I did kind of turn down the corner just slightly so that it would be more, it would give me a little bit of a bigger opening so that it's easier to take the hood down. But, you know, if you get cold easily and you want it a little more snug, you can just sew it up further.
The other thing I'll point out
Yeah.
about that is the original that they found, and I come up to
Yes,
you and point,
please.
there were 2 strings
Oh, yes.
right about here and here. Now it's great to have it nice and loose like that, but in the winter when you wanted it tight, one of the thoughts was those strings could be pulled in to tie it.
It's kind of like a string on a hoodie.
Like a snorkel parka.
Like-
Yeah, so if you pull it in and
Yeah.
you can even put it up over your chin if you need to. Yeah, I never attached the strings, but yeah, those are definitely an option.
'Cause it just makes sense, you
yeah.
know, if you're to wear that in winter time, so, and, you know, where there's snow and wind, you go, wow, that's actually catching a draft.
Yeah.
And all it took was a couple of strings strategically placed, and you actually have very snug.
Yes, exactly. And there are other hood types available, but they're not so rectangular in construction. Yeah. And there are other things like the Viking hats, etc., that are not quite triangles. They're slightly more velled out. Actually, I did bring one. So it's basically, it's 6 panels of triangles, but they're fat triangles. They start out small and then they are curved outwards, so that it fits the head much better than if they were just straight triangles. Because I tried that once, didn't work. Don't recommend. This is the way to go. It's a very simple hat. All 6 pieces are just exactly the same, and you just sew them all together. And if you finish the seams and so that they lay flat, it's more comfortable. I haven't gotten around to that yet, but whatever. Oh, and this is an example of not rectangular construction, and I chose this because this is the other type of tunic that is very iconic for the SCA, which is T-tunic. And basically what you do is you lay a t-shirt on the floor. This is why it's called this. You lay a t-shirt on the floor in half, and you kind of draw a curve rather than just the straight down where the t-shirt is. So you make it just slightly longer, and this is what people did to not make those gussets, was having that curve instead. Because remember, when it's on a curve, it's still giving a little extra, but it's not on the bias, so it's not quite as beneficial. But this is like the simplest tunic to make. If you have a t-shirt, lay it out on the floor over fabric. But this is not rectangular construction. However, it is still theoretically period for some cultures in some areas. Okay. All right, so let's go on to the actual fabric. I have some linen that I'm going to turn into a Birker tunic as an example, and I will show you some cutting layout and how to figure out measurements, well, how to figure out measurements of the fabric from measurements of the person. I forgot to add the skill to hem hood pattern onto my handout, but I will do that. I promise. See ya. Okay, so here's where we start doing math. So I have a set of measurements that are, I have to bring up here. So chest measurement is 44.5. Therefore, I am going to try to split that between the front and the back, of course. So that would be 22.25 for each one, but then you have to add in seam allowance. So when you add in seam allowance, that's probably going to be 23.5, because I think I'm going to give it half an inch on each side. No, I think I'm going to give it 3/4 inch on each side just to make sure. So I will doing 24.25. I will write this down. I brought extra paper.
Measure twice, cut once.
Exactly.
And you're gonna tell us you washed and dried the material first, right?
Yes,
To
I did.
Avoid shrinkage and other
I did
misfortunes.
indeed. Hence
Yes.
why the edges are serged, because I always serge fabric before before washing it, so that the edges don't fray too much. Of course, with modern fabrics, even the selvage can still fray, which is really annoying, but at least it's only at the selvage. So, and for anybody who doesn't know, the selvage is where the edges of the loom are, and then the cut edge is what you want to sew before washing, so that it doesn't try to get all the little fibers to fray away, because then you can lose.
Yeah, with
material.
linen, you could lose a couple inches.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, you can see that, especially because this happened even to the selvage. So yeah,
The etymology of that self edge.
yeah.
Oh, no kidding. Self-edge. Now that's cool. I said, huh,
Yes, the weaver knows.
very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
That is very sweet.
So when I said 44.5, right, so 44.5 divided by 2 is 22.25, 5. And then I have to measure selvage, or not selvage, I'm thinking selvage now. I have to measure seam allowance for each side, so the seam allowance has to double, which means that I am not only adding 3/4 inch on one side, but also the other. So it turns into, I'm adding 1.5 inches total. So plus 1.5 is going to be 23 3/4. All right. I'm glad I did that because on paper, because I think I did it wrong in my head. So that is why paper is so wonderful. So 25 or 23.75 body, front and back. Then I'm going to do all the measurements at once, I think, because that's going to be the easiest. I don't have to worry about hips right now because that's where the godets come in. And the waist is less than the chest, so that is helpful when one is knowing how wide to make the whole body. And the waist is pretty much where the godets are going to, well, it's going to be slightly above the waist where the godets start, so we're all good there. Arm circumference at chest is 12 inches. So when we say that, we're talking right about here right at the arm opening. So when that says 12 inches, that means when I fold it over, I'm going to be doing 6 inches on the fold plus another 1.5 inches for seam allowance, which means
It's gonna be skinny arms.
except the gore, right?
Oh, okay.
Well, because it's on the fold, right? So it's 12 inches really, plus 1.5 is 13.5.
Oh, well,
But you put it on the fold, so 13.5, and then on the fold, we put that divided by 2, so that's 12, 6 plus 3/4. So it's 6 3/4 for each one. 6.3 for each side of the fold. So that's what we will want for arms. And then we will have the gusset needs to be that extra bit there, which I think, what are mine and what are Tom's? That is the question, because it's going to be somewhere in the middle. So my gusset is, I think it's 3 inch. I think Tom's are a 4 inch. So might go with 3.5 inch.
do 6 inches for
I-
Carol.
Yeah,
I do a 6 inch, so, yeah.
But it depends if you like your arms like
I don't
tight
care.
and well
Yeah, I
fitted,
don't
Yeah.
care.
but I like a loose like pajama.
Oh, you know what? Mine are actually 4 inches,
Oh.
but that is including seam allowance.
Okay.
So I think Tom's then, or different. Tom's,
9/6, yeah, including.
Yeah.
So
Just cut
About
6 inches square.
Tom's are
probably
fine.
ends up,
Let's see what Tom's are.
And we know it fits them well.
We do. So
Proof, the
his,
proof is in the pudding.
oh yeah, his are actually 6 plus
Uh-huh.
seam allowance. All right, so,
And with his shoulders and traps and muscles
oh
and
yeah.
stuff. Yes.
Exactly. Still
Yeah.
working All right, so we are going to do, I believe, 6 inches, including seam allowance. For the sleeve gusset, 6 inches, including seam allowance. It's not done yet. It's almost done. Thanks. Yeah. So those are inspired by Viking embroidery motifs by way of Legend of Zelda.
Yeah, I recognize that symbol.
Yep, the
I also
Triforce.
like- Yeah, I recognize the triangles at the edges, so very nice combination. of
Thank you.
patterns.
Yeah. Thank you. All
I
right.
definitely want to do that. Embroidering the neckline of T-tunic.
I would actually recommend doing it not the way that I've done it there. I would recommend doing an extra facing. So having its own neckline and embroidering the neckline and
Like
then
that.
sewing it on. Yes.
Absolutely.
And
then if the cat pukes on it, you don't lose the whole thing.
exactly, exactly. Because
Yep, cut out the middle, cut out, it's on a square piece now, and I'll cut it round and then just lay it on, flip it over.
Sounds like a great
Shut
idea.
down.
yeah. Awesome. And so for the gussets, I'm not actually going to worry about those yet because it depends on how much I've got left after the arms. So all I need for the gussets technically, or the gores, I mean, I just need an extra 2 inches really. So I think it'll be completely fine, whatever is left over when I make the arms. All right, so I have my measurements. It's very simple, very simple. Let me get rid of these measurements now. And I will worry about the neck circumference later because that's not anything I need to do right now. Yes.
From measurement to actual sewing, how long does it take usually to make just a simple garment?
It depends.
If you already have all the materials.
If you already have all the materials, they're already washed, and you have all the measurements. Okay. It depends how much time you have on your hands. I can sometimes do it in a couple of days, or it can take months because I just have no time to actually finish it. So I've never really measured out how many hours I am using. Yes.
I go for 12 hours, give or take.
That makes sense.
If you give
That
yourself less than 12 hours, you get there.
That sounds fair. Yeah.
There's a lot
I
of,
do have to watch a pup, so
There you go.
I
Just make sure that the
yeah,
pup.
like maybe an hour at a time.
There you go.
well, it's the kind of thing you can pick up and put down. You do a seam, you think about it, you may have to take out the seam and do it again. That happens.
Yep. Yep. Your seam
Yeah.
ripper is your best
Yep.
friend
Yep.
and worst enemy.
Ricky, can I borrow you for a moment, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so I am going to pin the measurements. I've got my trusty measuring tape. And so I am going to, let's see, that says 23.75. I think what I'm going to do is check and see. 23.75. So theoretically, if I want to go all the way to the selvage, which because I have lost a little bit here, I may want to just bring it back a fraction of an inch so that I'm not actually losing any from the bits that are fraying at the edge here. Then I can put a pin right here. And this, you may be able to tell that the edge of my fabric isn't actually even. One of the reasons for this is it kind of warps a little bit in the sewing machine or in the washing machine. If you wash it by hand, it probably won't warp as much, but shrinkage does happen, which is why you want to cut it after you have washed it. And you want to, if it's linen, you want to wash it at the highest temperature possible and then dry it at the highest temperature possible so that you're making sure that the fabric is going to shrink more than it will in subsequent washings. And I always try to wash things at a lower temperature, cool water. It doesn't have to be completely cold, but not the highest setting after you make the garb. And of course, depending on the embellishments you put on the garb, you might have to hand wash it anyway. But if you're planning on putting it in the washing machine, that's my recommendation, is to wash it hot first, then make the garment, then wash it at a cooler temperature. All right. So I am going to take a look and see what the grain is, where I have lost a little bit, so that I'm making sure to cut it evenly. And one thing that's great with linen is that when you cut it, you can kind of bring a, let me show you, you can bring out a fiber so that you are saving as much as possible. Linen has a pronounced weave structure, usually, especially if it's tabby weave, which is going to give you a very straight up and down and across kind of section. So you can take one strand of it and kind of pull, and then you can see where the straight line is. When you do that, you know that you are cutting specifically on the grain. This is if you want, it's a great trick. You have to be careful because sometimes linen will snap pretty easily. So you just have to make sure that you are holding it securely, but not pulling it too much. You are gently pulling the fabric away from the fiber rather than pulling the fiber away from the fabric. This is a trick that was taught to me by somebody in a fabric store at one point.
It's a great technique if you're making drapes. You want to make
Oh, yeah.
sure you're cutting straight.
Oh, yes.
You don't always get a straight cut from the fabric store.
That is very true. Well, this was not an average fabric store. This was kind of a fancy fabric store that I just happened to find. And unfortunately, it is no longer in business, but
Where was that?
it was, crud, what town? Down in southern Vermont. Was it Brattleboro or it might have been Brattleboro. It was,
They had a lot of imports.
yeah, I got this beautiful red Irish linen there. Oh, it was gorgeous. And it was the linen gauze. And I got a gauze weight wool, which it's so hard to find that. And it was on clearance because they were getting rid of that season, the previous season's fabrics because they were going into summer and they didn't want the winter stuff. So they got rid of the wool. And I was like, heck yeah, for that price, I'm totally getting, you know, several yards of it so I can make myself a dress. Yeah, okay, so now that I have cut it, and actually let me bring this over so anybody who wants to see this later can actually see what I'm talking about. Now that I have cut it, you can see it kind of has a little bit of a line here where I took out that one strand, and that is going to be easier to cut now because of that. Can everybody see that? It's just a little wrinkly, it looks like.
Yeah, I was out of pulling that thread on purpose.
Yeah. Only when you are trying to cut things and you need a very, very straight line, that's what you want to do. So let me cut this along this edge. So what I'm doing is making sure that I stay on that one line, that I'm not cutting fibers. I cutting between two lines of fibers as much as possible. This is the boring, you know, it takes forever kind of part if you really want to make sure you're cutting a straight line because it takes forever.
I love it.
You love doing it?
I love my scissors.
More
Really
power to
good
you.
ones.
Yeah.
Okay to interact fabric.
That's fair. Yeah. I prefer doing the actual sewing bits to the cutting bits. I get very impatient.
What?
I like seeing all the pieces laid out and then seeing the result.
Oh,
Yeah. That is always good. Definitely.
You know, it's funny, I make garb for Kenmore, quite large. And I'm, you know, of a substantial size myself, not a twig. And the your eye knows when the fabric is right. So I don't go when I'm doing it, when you've made the same tunic 20 times, you don't really need to do those measurements. You can just haul out an early tunic, clone it. It's like, oh, that's how wide the main panel is, and that's how wide the sleeve is, and that's how long it is. Snip, snip, snip it down. But the oh, go ahead.
Sorry. If you have something already made, you can't. I made my own apron out of linen and then dyed it. And
I forgot to
I
take
pretty
an
much just use
important
a
measurement here.
basic black apron as the top, as the base.
Exactly. Clothing saves you a lot of time. If you have if you do your measurements and then you have your eye and your eye is telling you that what you've measured doesn't look right, you have to stop and think about it. Because there's an instinct that kicks in that says, maybe I better figure this out again. You just say, damn it, it says 20 inches. I was like, oh, should have been 22. Too late. But then there's also something that happens. It's like a paralysis where you're looking at the fabric and you don't dare cut it. You know, it's like, I'm gonna, but no. I'm gonna, but no.
I usually get that one way with more valuable fabrics, like looking at that velvet to decorate our buckskin.
Absolutely.
That's-
Yes.
It took me 2 years to cut into this fabric.
You gotta
Yes.
get the courage.
Because it's the silk and it's like, yeah, the Sartor reproduction. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it took me 2 years. I neglected to take one measurement before, which was the length of the completed garment. So I just did that. It's all good.
Oh, good.
But just FYI, that is kind of an important one to have.
Well, there's always the kludge of adding an extra layer along the bottom to lengthen it. I've done that twice.
I have definitely, or just doing a rolled hem at the bottom rather than a deeper hem that you might have intended before.
Right. Get out to the last.
Yeah. Yep. So what I need to do here is, unfortunately, it's in centimeters, but I don't know why I took that one in centimeters, but it's 160 centimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. This is 100 here. And I probably should have put this stuff for this away. Oops. So that I can actually lay it out.
I was wondering how you were going to get a tunic out of all that and that little piece of cloth.
Oh, yeah.
Folded. No wonder.
Oh yeah, I had it accordion folded so that it would be easier to,
I thought this is the loaves and the fishes.
I mean, sometimes my tunics are like that, but in this
Now
case,
it's clear.
in this case, I actually did have a plan. Oops. I am going to need 10 extra. 10 extra centimeters. So let me make doubly sure that I did that correctly.
Is that your finished one? Because you still have a seam allowance and a hem, right?
Yes, yes, indeed. Thank you. Seam allowance I don't need to worry about, but hem I do. Yes, and I think I want the hem. Usually I like it to be a few inches. So for this, it would probably be like 8 centimeters. Because that way, if you want it longer, or if the hem gets kind of grungy and you need to do something with it, then it's easier to modify it. All right, so thank you for reminding me.
They can hold that.
Thank you. Perfect.
Having done that,
Oh yeah. And another thing, when you're measuring, you want to make sure it's lying flat, but you don't want to stretch the fibers because otherwise your measurements are going to get wonky and you don't want that. Thank you. I'm going to need to have that for the extra 10 centimeters plus 8 centimeters, 18 centimeters. Joanne's. All right. Thank you. Yes. Good call. Good call.
Well, it's hard because we're all yammering at you and it's hard to keep your line of thought.
Yeah. But you know, this is the first time I've you know, taught a sewing anything since before COVID. Well, in person at least. Thank you. Yeah, right before COVID, I was in the middle of a production of a play, and I was the costume designer, and so I was teaching college students how to make these costumes. And we were 3 weeks away from production when COVID hit and everything got shut down and the play is no longer happening. It makes me very sad because all of the costumes that were mostly complete are now sitting in an office and unlikely to be used anytime in the future, which is so frustrating. But COVID happens and
They were able to use that skills for some tasks.
yes, that is my hope, is that they are able to transfer those skills for other things they want to do later on. And there were some students who had already had some sewing experience and there were some that were brand new to it. So wide variety, and it was a lot of fun.
You want to go thread again?
I am. Yes, because I definitely want to make sure that this is straight, because this piece of fabric, then I'm going to also have to cut the back out of it. So I want to make sure that the front and the back are both straight on the grain. Yep.
I never used to do that because I was always in a hurry and I just put down little pins to tell me where to cut. And this is really worth the time doing
I
that.
agree.
Really worth it.
We'll definitely have to take that tip to my mom. She wants to make these drapes for our kitchen curtains.
Oh yeah.
So I'll definitely tell her that tip.
Perfect. Bless you.
Thank you. Thread is- It's also very meditative. Then the thread breaks.
Yes.
Well, we can always pick up a neighbor.
Then you pick up the
Yeah.
neighbor.
Like that.
But it happens.
It
You
does.
put a lot of stress on the thread. But it's not used to treating that.
No. But what you can do is you can just cut it until it doesn't
Yes.
have that line anymore, and
Well,
then
in
you
some
just.
cases you can pull two.
That's true.
Yeah.
You can pull two. This is heavy enough that I don't really want to pull two on this particular fabric, but yeah, on lighter fabrics especially.
You should go take a look at that because it makes a clear line. And then you have this perfect straight cutting line.
I love the way it
Yeah.
feels.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've
Got
done
the-
this to my sheets a couple
the
times by
thread
accident,
pulled
but
and
I've never
underneath
tried thought of
that
doing it.
tension.
It's got that little the
Mhm.
tension and then pucker and
Yeah.
then
That's so
yeah.
helpful.
and you could
You're
almost do it.
welcome.
Imagine if you were sight impaired. That is a great tactile
Oh, heck
way
yeah.
to know where to cut. You don't go too far astray. Just feel.
That makes total sense. Or, if you have glasses and also it's a little dim in the room you're working in, that's also, I mean, along the same lines, it's very helpful. But this is definitely the part that,
So, I always like to, in my head, sort of recreate the image of what this would look like.
Mhm.
Where would they have done this layout?
ah,
Oh,
that is a
Thinking
really
of a
good question.
Viking longhouse.
right. They don't have a nice melamine
I mean, we're
top
lucky.
table.
Yeah,
Yeah,
There's straw all over the place and chicken feathers and dog hairs.
my guess would be that they would have some kind of big linen sheet or something that maybe an old sail or
Yes.
something that they would spread out, but
See, the other thing in the
Wow.
longhouses, they have a lot of people. And if
That's
everybody
true.
held a corner to keep it taut, then you could cut it in the middle. I think a lot of times we're working alone in a room, maybe
Right.
one other person walking. Oh, they had a village.
I have a quilting bee frame.
oh,
If anybody's interested, I'm selling.
oh, cool.
Just you're mentioning that, maybe.
Just the groups of people.
Yeah.
working
Because
on it.
it's one of the big old
Oh,
square
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah,
It's not the kind that
That's
you fold it and it's only like 12 inches apart.
Right.
No, this is a big.
My grandmother has like,
Yeah.
so I
mhm. Those are
I
so
wonder if
cool.
You
hang
can
it
use
on
them
the work
to
with
hang up tapestry.
And
Use
where
it
do you think it's cutting things up? But cut vertical?
Could you hang it and cut from hanging it?
Yeah,
yeah,
that's also what.
Theoretically,
Yeah.
yeah. So
That's
you
what
could
I
cut it right off the loom sometimes.
Yep.
doing wool fabric washed it, and then drew the pieces and then cut it directly.
Some gosh,
It's
very
Would
interesting.
make sense
Yeah.
hanging it brown thread and free that'll
Mhm.
move as it's hanging. That's your mom.
right.
And if you're weaving your own size.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
the other
Ethelwolf's got it.
Yeah.
Yep. That's
Yep.
that's about right. And because if you're weaving for Ken Wolf, you're gonna set your loom that wide. Even for Rosie, you set your loom that wide.
That might be an exaggeration.
Let's see, you can use the same width,
Yeah,
Kenwell, and make pep close.
yeah, that could work. That could work.
I was going to let people know that if there's anyone here interested, like Marika, since who is interested in using a fork weighted loom, weaving school has one still there. And
Yeah.
he's recently completed, a 13th century piece.
Oh, did he now?
Yeah.
Oh, was
And
this
so
like
the
last
loom is
year?
now available, and they'd
Oh.
really like to have somebody from the SCA who would be
Oh.
dedicated to the project to really do something on it.
Oh,
Just thought I'd let you know.
goodness,
because-
that it's probably beyond my powers, but there is some talk that some wealthy gentleman has endowed a Viking enterprise in the southern part of the state.
Oh, yeah, I've heard
Yeah.
this.
And it sounds like the work weighted loom.
Well,
would
if
be
you
a
want to
great
spread the word,
addition.
yes,
Yeah.
yay, the Viking School in Marshfield is looking for someone to do a dedicated project. Because
To
the
do
loom
it
right
there.
now is
Yeah.
free.
Yeah,
In other words, it takes a long time to do something, and it was on the loom for a long time, and now it's open.
right. But to do like there's a lot of people who try to do the diamond twill
Mhm.
on a horizontal loom, but they don't have the pedaling right. And although it gives the impression of diamonds,
Mhm.
it's not the way that it's done on the work weight. The diamonds have a different structure.
Mm.
Well, there would be Norman to give you all kinds of
Ah,
direction
yeah.
that you would.
Yeah.
Norman's pretty darn
He's
awesome.
probably one of the few people on the planet is, living repository.
Yeah. For anybody who doesn't know, Norman, it is in his 90s
No,
now?
no, he just turned 86.
86.
Oh,
He's
gosh.
86.
88, sorry.
88? Okay. And
Wow.
he is from Scotland, and he has done a whole bunch of research on work weighted looms,
Wow.
among other
Is
things.
this
So,
Norman Bennett?
Yeah.
yes.
Oh,
this
I
is
know
it.
Norman. I know him
Of
as a
course you do.
storyteller and
Yes.
yes.
Oh.
He tells great
He's a
stories.
master
Yeah.
artist.
We could do a trip.
Where is,
Mhm.
Marshfield.
I know Marshfield, whereabouts in
On the
Marshfield?
top of Hollister Hill, you
Hollister
go
Hill, yep.
down over the hill and it's just there.
Yeah,
Oh,
there's
okay.
no cell service there, just
Yeah.
FYI, but
Yeah, you
It's
feel like you're
awesome.
in another time,
Yeah.
another place.
it's an amazing weaving school.
All
Uh,
based on, well, there's a dozen, 200-year-old farm looms set up. Then up the hill is another weaving school. It's part of the same school. And there's another dozen looms there.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
I was in Oaxaca 2 years ago, and there's a neighborhood where weavers hang out. I thought I'm going to check out these weavers in
Oh, yeah.
Oaxaca, right? So what I heard was the click, click, click of the looms. I thought, oh, this is cool. So I was looking for a building, and they weren't
Oh, no.
buildings.
Of
They were
course.
in sheds, tin roofed sheds.
Yeah.
Probably better lighting there, right?
Scattered here and there. Oh my gosh, it was crazy. And so it was
That's
like
so cool.
dirt floor. They were hanging things on like pegs and strings from of their little weaving shed.
Mhm.
And I spoke enough Spanish. I was really curious, and I could tell I was all over what they were doing. So this one
Mhm.
guy very nicely stopped and started telling me how they're doing. These guys, I'm sure, are being paid pennies.
Yeah.
And they're producing these beautiful cotton rugs with patterns laid in.
Mhm.
You know, the cover, the that he uses when he's napping. That was from that. So, and I couldn't buy anything. They weren't set up to buy it. It was not a tourist. They were production, and then the master comes and takes all their things and sells them at the store for 50 times what they're worth. Materials.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was cool.
I bet.
That was cool, but it seemed very medieval to me. The model of that people are sort of living in almost squalor, working their hearts out. Yeah.
I mean, it's very similar with metal workers in India and
Right. This happens
Japan
all
as
over.
well. Yeah.
Happens all over.
And Sir Carl had his feet fit.
Yes. Making what was it, chainmail and leather things also.
All kinds of various. So it's all in it.
And if you do it right, I imagine it benefits,
Yeah.
religious school and
As long as it's
stuff.
fair trade
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
Which I'm sure Carl would do. That guy.
That's yeah.
Wow.
All right. So I have now come to the end of where I want to cut. So I just stop pulling this.
Yes.
So that the rest of the fabric doesn't have that in it. So just FYI, that's what's happening here.
Fun.
And then I just, again, cut along the edge here.
It's funny, Augusta, when you said 12 hours, and I'm just going through my head of the process of, design it, measure it, lay it out, cut it, and then all the seams you have to do. 12 hours is probably a minimum.
Yeah.
Well, yes.
Yeah,
And it's if
I'm
you
saying
really
it
know
was-
what you're doing.
it can
Yeah.
get fancier, but
I mean, I made a little dress for a woman's size 8,
yeah.
and it still took me 2 hours because I wanted to make sure it fit her. We had 3 fittings to make sure it fit her nicely. No, I mean, it does, it takes time. I can make a dress in 3 hours, but I don't know if I'm that easy to fit.
Right.
What I was thinking was making a simple dress that is period, but I can also wear every day.
Yeah.
Short regards.
Yeah, a Birker Tunic underdress kind of thing is going to be a really good one. I mean, you saw the blue one that I made that I have used. I have worn it other places to teach.
Is that there, the light blue?
The light blue, yeah.
It looked kind of gray from where I was sitting.
Oh yeah,
So undergarments under this,
yes.
Yeah, this
is it
exactly
is it
what I was
a
thinking. It
softer
looks like-
fabric
but it's so
or
simple, like
what's the
underdress.
deal?
Usually an undyed linen.
And it would it be like a shift or would it be in 2 pieces?
Yeah, try
The
not to.
bottom and the top.
Definitely one piece.
Nice.
And they haven't found any like underwear for Viking era women. Believe me, I know because I've tried to do research on this. I'm actually still doing research on it. I just had to take a break because I'm in school. But it's it would be a shift either with sleeves or without. There aren't really anything to tell us which, as far as I know. It would be likely, I think, in colder climates to have the long sleeves, especially if you're wearing wool over top of it. Some people are allergic to wool, some people are not. So
I've been wondering whether that itchiness from wearing wool was not something that you were picky about because it's the only thing available, but that it kept you warm because you were itchy.
I mean, the other thing is, usually a lot of the itchiness from wool comes from either lanolin wasn't well scoured out, or they're using both the long strands and the short strands together, which makes little bits poke out and scratch. So either way,
And somebody told me that there was a hitchiness to sweaters, for instance, nowadays
Mhm.
because of the heavy detergents that are used, and it heats up the fiber.
which also makes sense because that kills it up and makes little fibers break and then stretch out or, be a little.
From my understanding, it's also they did a lot of felting.
Mm,
So after the fabric was woven, they manipulated significantly to sort of mash some of those harsh fibers.
You're talking about walking.
Yes.
mhm.
Yes.
And I think if you want to go way back, there were sheep that had some of the more primitive types of sheep had the kind of the rough outer coat of wool and then really soft inner coat, and they had ways of separating the two, so they could make. You'd have to, it'd be rich
Removing
and
the
labor
guard
intensive.
Mhm.
Yeah, you remove the guard hair and then you get all the prickles out, and the soft, cloudy stuff. That's the inner layer.
Yep. And then the rough outer layer would be good for things like outer gear, like,
Yes,
like the hoods and the capes and
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
All right,
Horse
we have a
ones.
front
Yay!
and a back. And we just fold it over.
All right.
There you go. That's
Nice.
What's this style called again?
so this is part of the Birker Tunic. So, yep. Birka being the place in Sweden, Birka. Yep. Yep. I know. It's hard because a lot of people say Birka, but
That almost sounds like punk.
yeah. But then if you say,
So
I can't pronounce it in Swedish, but I think it's more like Yoko. Maybe? Am I correct?
Yeah. Well, it's
Close-ish?
two. So there's two separate words.
Okay.
And they both refer to the same place.
Okay.
So Birka or Birka, you're actually saying it better than I just do. So Birka is a place, but there's an island of Porto, which is a place. It's in the Birka region. So yes, Porto is an island.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. I
It's
didn't
also
know
a
that.
lake. So island is it.
That makes sense.
And it's not too far from Stockholm.
Excellent. Okay, so we have the front and back. Now we need to do the sleeves. And I'm just going to cut off the little bit of tail here.
Yeah.
We don't need that. That can go with the rest of the cabbage. Anybody know that term, cabbage? The little scraps of fabric? That's
Great, I did not know
if
that.
you've seen anything by Bernadette Banner on YouTube, she does a lot of historical reconstruction, but more of the Victorian time period. But she talks about cabbage a lot, and it's just the little scraps that are left over.
Potential pet toys.
Yeah,
Someone-
exactly. Well, we actually went over a little bit. So we can keep going. We have another hour in this space, or we can stop now. And if anybody else has any questions,
I just wanted to thank you for this wonderful presentation.
Oh, of
Nice.
course.
Thank you.
Yeah. Here, I'm going to stop the recording because I realized it's still going.